Episode 4, Trials on the Tracks, Lessons from Passers-by. If there's anything I've learned from decades spent on a small railway platform, it's that people often carry more than luggage when they travel. They bring their stories, the laughter and tears, the burdens and hopes that shape who they are. Over the years, I, Gopal, the Chai Walla of Thirupaloor Station, have served countless cups of tea to a parade of individuals from all walks of life. Some of them I barely recall, others left an indelible mark. After Michael and I concluded our talk about my marriage and family, he asked to hear about the many travellers who had crossed my path. "Surely," he said, "you've encountered all sorts of characters. People who taught you lessons, who made you laugh, or who brought trouble." I admitted that I had enough stories to fill a library, but perhaps I could share a few that stood out. And so, the next day, as I poured chai for the early morning crowd, I began to recall some of the most unforgettable passers-by who had left footprints on the platform and on my heart. Morning start, a curious glance at the past. I woke with the rooster's crow again, my shack dim in the pre-dawn light. For some reason, I felt a surge of energy. Maybe it was the prospect of sharing these memories with Michael, or maybe it was the joy of simply being alive and having something to look forward to. By 6 a.m., I'd set up my cart beneath the banyan tree, just as I had for decades. The tree's gnarled roots, which had cracked the platform tiles over time, felt like an old friend. People filtered in from the newly arrived train, and soon the station was filled with the soft murmur of morning greetings, the clanking of steel tiffin boxes, and the shuffle of slippers on concrete. Michael came in shortly after with his backpack, camera, and the same bright-eyed grin. "Ready for another round of stories, Gopal Anna?" he asked, pen and notepad already in hand. I laughed, passing him a steaming cup of ginger cardamom chai. "As ready as I'll ever be, Michael G." The holy man who claimed to have wings. One of the first stories I chose to share was about a travelling holy man, someone who appeared at the station unexpectedly, clad in saffron robes and chanting mantras under his breath. It must have been 2 decades ago. I remember him because he wore a peacock feather in his hair and claimed he possessed mystical powers. He would stretch out his arms, saying, "I can fly if I choose to. I simply refrain out of mercy for those who cannot." At first, I thought he was just another eccentric, but he drew a crowd. People were curious. Children ran up to him, asking, "Can you really fly?" He'd nod sagely, replying that he flew every night when humanity slept. He came to my cart, eyes sparkling like a man who'd seen the entire cosmos. "Give me your strongest chai," he said in a booming voice, "so that I might share my blessings with you." I poured him a hot cup, which he swallowed in great gulps. Then, with an air of grand theatricality, he declared, "This chai is fit for the gods," and pressed his palm over my forehead in a so-called blessing. Michael chuckled at my retelling. "Did you believe any of it?" he asked. I grinned. "I believe in the goodness of people, but I'm not sure if he flew at night." After finishing his chai, he asked for more, without paying, of course. I gave it to him willingly. He left a small strip of saffron cloth on my cart, saying it would protect me from evil spirits. "Did it work?" Michael teased. I shrugged. "Who knows?" But I kept it for years, tied around the handle of my kettle. Sometimes I think it brought good luck. My sales were decent whenever that cloth was around. Michael laughed, scribbling in his notepad. "Interesting. So that's lesson 1, I suppose? Keep an open mind?" I rubbed my chin. "Yes, an open mind, and an open heart. You never know which stranger might leave you with a small gift, a blessing, a trinket, or even just a curious memory." The Cranky Officer and the Broken Suitcase. Next, I described a more comical yet tense encounter with a middle-aged government officer. He wore a crisp white shirt, carried a leather briefcase, and had a permanent scowl etched on his face. It was a humid afternoon, the kind where the sweat clings to your back even if you stand still. This officer arrived on the 2:15 train, rushing off with an air of self-importance. He approached my cart, barking, "Chai, quick! I have an urgent meeting." I hurried to pour him a cup, but just then a stray dog darted between us, knocking against his leg. Startled, he dropped his briefcase, and it split open, spilling papers everywhere. The officer exploded into curses. I tried to help gather his documents, I explained to Michael, but he was fuming. He accused me of placing my cart in the wrong spot, though I'd been in the same place for years. Michael winced. "How did you handle it?" I gave a wry smile. I kept calm. I apologized, even though it wasn't really my fault. I offered him a fresh cup of chai, free of charge, but he was so angry he refused to take it. He stomped away, muttering threats about lodging a complaint. "And did he?" Michael asked. I shook my head. A few hours later, the same man returned, looking worn out, shirt stained with sweat. He approached my cart quietly. I thought he'd come to unleash more anger, but instead he said, "I'm sorry I was rude. It's been a terrible day." Then he bought 2 cups, one for him, one for me. I paused, a small grin tugging at my lips. We sipped our chai together, talking about the pressure he was under at his job. He admitted he shouldn't have taken it out on me. By the end, he was a different person entirely, almost friendly. Michael jotted down more notes. "So that's lesson 2, yes?" I nodded. Anger and stress can warp a person, but empathy and a hot cup of tea can bring them back to themselves. Sometimes what people need isn't judgment or retaliation, it's understanding, and maybe a place to cool down before they face the world again. A Pilgrim's Unexpected Tears. Later that morning, after a brief rush of customers, we found another quiet moment. Michael sipped his chai thoughtfully, then asked, "What about sad stories? You must have encountered tragedy too." I exhaled, bracing myself. Yes, plenty. One that stands out is a young pilgrim who was on her way to Ramswaram. She wore simple cotton clothes and carried a small cloth bag. She must have been in her early 20s. I remember her face. It had a kind of fragile determination. He leaned in, curious. "What happened?" She came to my cart, asked for a cup of chai. As I poured, I noticed tears welling in her eyes. Trying to be polite, I didn't pry, but she broke down right there, sobbing. I learned that her mother had just passed away. She was going to Rameswaram to perform the final rites. She felt alone, having no siblings or other close relatives. Michael's expression softened. "That's heartbreaking." "It was," I agreed, my voice dropping. I didn't know how to console her. My words felt inadequate. So I just sat her down on the nearby bench, gave her a fresh cup of chai, and let her cry. Eventually, she told me about her mother's last wish, that her ashes be immersed in the holy waters at Rameswaram. She was terrified of traveling alone with a small urn in her bag. She kept worrying if she'd lose it or if someone would steal it. I paused, recalling how helpless she looked. All I could do was reassure her. "You're almost there, sister. Soon, your mother's soul will find peace." I told her to be careful, to keep the urn close. Maybe it was just common sense, but it seemed to comfort her. Michael jotted something, then looked up, empathy in his eyes. "Sometimes just being there is enough." I nodded. "Exactly." We parted ways when her train pulled in. I never saw her again, but I often think about her. I hope she found peace in completing her mother's last rites. It reminded me that every traveller on these tracks carries unseen sorrows, and that we can offer them a moment of solace, if only through a kind word or a cup of tea. The class reunion on the platform. As the day wore on, the station became busier. Groups of travellers poured in from midday trains, while vendors hustled to sell snacks and bottled water. After a frantic hour of serving chai, things calmed. That's when Michael and I regrouped near the banyan tree, where a gentle breeze stirred the branches. "Any stories that are just plain funny?" he asked, flipping to a fresh page in his notepad. I burst into a hearty laugh, wiping sweat from my brow. Oh, plenty. One time, a group of old classmates arranged a reunion at this station, of all places. They'd studied together at a school in a nearby town decades ago. Now they were in their 60s, some even in their 70s. They chose the station because it was a central meeting point for them, coming from different cities. Michael grinned. That's unusual. Did they hire the station hall or something? I shook my head, still chuckling. No, they just took over the platform benches. They brought along tiffin carriers packed with food, idlis, coconut chutney, sweets, and they had flasks of coffee. But they discovered my chai and decided they preferred that. They ended up staying all day, reminiscing about their school pranks and old teachers. They laughed so loudly that even the ticket collector told them to quiet down. He laughed too. I can imagine the scene. What made it hilarious was how each one boasted about their accomplishments, who had the biggest house, who had the most successful grandchildren. But by the end of the day, they all realized they were just happy to be alive and together. One uncle even said, "We're just old brinjals in the market, but at least we're still here." That cracked everyone up. Michael scribbled the phrase, "old brinjals in the market," with a smile. So I guess that's a lesson in celebrating life's simple pleasures? Indeed, I said, spreading my hands. Sometimes the best gatherings don't need fancy hotels or banquet halls, just a place to sit, a cup of chai, and people who share a history. The Young Runaway and an Unexpected Reunion. By late afternoon, the day had grown sultry, the air thick with humidity. Michael sat on a crate near my cart, sipping yet another cup of chai. He'd become quite the tea addict under my influence, but he didn't seem to mind. "What about stories of people who disappeared and then came back?" Michael asked. "I feel like train stations are places of comings and goings, but maybe someone left a lasting impact." I scratched my head, recalling various individuals. Then one memory surfaced, vivid and emotional. There was a boy, no older than 16, who ran away from home, I began. He showed up one evening, clutching a small cloth bag. He looked frightened, kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was chasing him. Michael's pen hovered. "Did you approach him?" I nodded. I offered him chai, but he was so nervous he refused at first. Eventually, hunger and thirst got the better of him. He told me he'd run away from an abusive father. He wanted to head to the big city, Chennai, to find work. The poor kid had hardly any money. Must have been terrifying for him. It was, I agreed. I was worried too. Runaways are vulnerable. So I let him rest near my cart for a while, gave him some food. I tried to get more information to contact someone who could help, but he was adamant about not going back. "What did you do?" I contacted a friend in the local police station just to ensure the boy wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. My friend promised to keep an eye out, not to force the boy home, but to see if there was a safer solution. Eventually, they contacted an NGO that helps street kids. The boy was reluctant, but he agreed to go with them rather than risk traveling alone with no plan. Michael exhaled, relief evident on his face. "That's kind of you, Anna. You might have saved his life." I smiled wistfully. I just did what I could. The boy left with the NGO folks. I never heard from him again until about 5 years later. One day, a smart-looking young man in a decent shirt showed up at my cart. He tapped my shoulder and said, "Do you remember me?" I stared, not recognizing him at first. Then he said, "I was that runaway you helped." Michael leaned forward, excited. "Wow, so he came back?" "Yes, and he had a box of sweets with him. He'd finished some vocational training through the NGO, got a job at a mechanics workshop in another town, and was visiting Thirupaloor for a wedding. He thanked me for not letting him slip into a dangerous life. Said the NGO had turned him around." Michael grinned broadly. "That must have felt amazing." I nodded, my heart swelling at the memory. It did. It reminded me that you never know how a small act of kindness can ripple through someone's life. And that's lesson... Oh, I've lost count. But it's one of the big ones. Moments of irony and reflection. Between stories, Michael and I paused to serve a fresh wave of travellers. A group of college students hopped off a train, lively with chatter about an upcoming cricket match. A middle-aged couple, arms full of shopping bags, ordered 2 cups, worrying aloud if they'd catch their connection. The cycle of station life continued, each swirl of activity a microcosm of everyday India. Eventually, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the platform. The air cooled slightly, and the golden light turned the station's worn concrete into something almost picturesque. Michael snapped a few photos, capturing that magic hour glow. "Anna," he said, returning to me, "thank you for sharing these stories. They're enlightening and so human." I smiled, giving the pot of chai a final stir before turning off the stove for the evening. "My pleasure. You asked for the trials on the tracks, and these are just a handful. There are countless more. Teachers, soldiers, fishermen, merchants, beggars, lovers sneaking away, each with a story to tell." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I see now why you say you have 1,000 stories. This station is like a stage where people's lives briefly intersect." "That's precisely it," I agreed. "They come and go, but for a moment we share the same space, maybe exchange a few words and a cup of chai. Sometimes that's all it takes to leave an impression." Michael turned off his recorder, slipping it into his backpack. "I think I have enough for today. We'll continue tomorrow. Maybe then you can tell me more about your daughters, how they grew up, and also about the hardships that you hinted at." I caught the weight in his voice, knowing he referred to the darker times, like losing Lakshmi. I nodded gently. "Yes, we can talk about that. There's laughter and grief intertwined in that chapter of my life. Perhaps it's best told over a late-night chai when the station is quieter." He agreed, standing up to stretch. "Looking forward to it, Anna. Good night for now." Evening silence and the unspoken lessons. After Michael headed off, I continued my routine of tidying up the cart and packing away my utensils. A few late passengers came by for a final cup. I served them with a weary but genuine smile. When the last train of the evening pulled away, I found myself alone on the platform except for Raja, the station dog. He trotted up, tail wagging, and I patted his head affectionately. "You've been around for many of these stories, haven't you, my friend?" I murmured. He tilted his head as if trying to understand. A soft breeze rustled the banyan leaves overhead. I looked up at the gnarled branches that had borne witness to all my years here, the people who passed by, the heartbreaks and joys, the hopes and disappointments. That tree was like an old sage, silently observing each chapter. I couldn't help but think about the pilgrim, the runaway boy, and even the cranky officer. Each one had taught me something about life's fragility, resilience, and the surprising power of a shared moment. Perhaps if more people understood how fleeting these encounters can be, they'd cherish them all the more. Under the flickering station light, I finished locking up my cart, then began the short walk back to my shack. My footsteps echoed against the empty concrete, as if the station itself was exhaling a sigh after a day's worth of comings and goings. Sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't stayed here all these years, would my life have been simpler or more complicated? Would I have been happier or more successful? But each time such thoughts arise, I remind myself, my place is here, between the trains, pouring chai, offering a smile, and collecting stories. As I entered my shack, the faint light of my kerosene lamp illuminating the cramped interior, I reflected on how grateful I was for the small wonders life had granted me. "One day at a time," I whispered, thinking of the many travelers who had taught me exactly that. One day, one story, one cup of chai at a time. With that, I lay down to rest, lulled by the distant hum of a cargo train passing through. Tomorrow I'd awaken to new faces, new possibilities, and perhaps more stories worth telling.